field. And the teacher education only 4.6%, the art 0.9%, the natural science only 1.1%. Many years we have a lot of to implement the STEM in school, but only 1.1% students to come to natural science, and the social science and tourism is 29%. So how to improve the number percent of the students who come to mathematics, science, and in engineering? That's a question for us. Yeah.
Yeah, at least Vietnam is not happy with the number, with the quantity, and the quality is still the question. Yeah.
I do agree with the Australian position that it's very difficult to have some elements of assessment of what is happening in terms of quality and quantity at university. However, quite recently in France, actually last year, there was a report by the Ministry of Education that stated that the number of students registering, entering university in STEM-related subjects, so one of the categories has been, it had been going down between the end of the 90s and 2010, something like that. So for 20 years it went down quite drastically, and for the last 15 years this hasn't been going down so much and might be going up a little bit. So at least it's not as dramatic apparently, if just looking at the figure of how many students enter university. So the question is, we don't really know whether this is an effect of 20 years of educational policy related to STEM, or if this is other factors. So, but this figure is there. That's one element. And in terms of recruitment, the other elements is also in terms of girls engaging in STEM. It's still much lower than boys. For example, there's about 40% of girls that do A-level or baccalaureate in French with a more scientific orientation, but only 30% of girls in engineering training, for example. So you're kind of thinking, where are all these girls going? But then 15 years ago, there were less than 15% of girls in engineering careers. So you could think that although the difference is still there, it's not as big as what it was used to be. And I'll give you now another aspect is the quality, because I've just talked about quantity. And in terms of quality, I think this is much more difficult to assess. I would like to go back to the PISA report 3 years ago now, that stated that students who declare that they receive inquiry-based science education tend to do not to do so well, at PISA tests, which would indicate that students, so it's not strictly STEM, it's inquiry, which would indicate that students who declare that they have received an inquiry-based science teaching perform less well in examinations such as PISA. And the interpretation for this, it has been talking quite a lot in the scientific community about this. The interpretation for this is two elements. The first element is that it is complex for teachers to teach in an inquiry manner, and it is quite likely, and research suggests that when teachers are in difficulty in teaching in an inquiry manner, I'm not going to go into detail, what they do is probably of lesser quality than if they were in a more comfortable face-to-face, straightforward approach, which highlights the difficulty of teacher education and teacher training related to these type of approaches. So that's one element. And then the second element is also that if students declare that do they have to know, the students, that they're doing inquiry, and do they really know what inquiry is? And a teaching that is stamped inquiry-based science education might actually not be at all any type of inquiry-based education. So this is the other aspect.
Yeah, I think in education we have beautiful hypothesis, and when we suggest it for reality, for policy, but it still takes time and data to prove it happen. And we all know that quality and quantity of university entrance is not the ultimate goal of STEM education. As Nanbao already mentioned, we have a much broader goal. But for the policy makers, they are very much interested in universities entrance. So we go to the next point, or do you want to add?
I'd just like to respond briefly about what constitutes a STEM-related discipline. We've had a growing number of interest in nursing, midwifery, paramedics. Universities are overflowing with people engaging in those particular areas, and I don't know where they go when they graduate, but they don't seem to care too much about that. There's absolutely overflowing with paramedics courses. That you would have to think that those programs also qualify as STEM, and I wonder how we consider that. And so that's my first response. Second response is I was reminded of a large-scale research project that I was engaged in probably 10 years ago now, which looked at the disciplinary actions of teachers and their effectiveness. And we looked at teachers that taught biology, maths, history, and music, as it happens. And we identified teachers who their peers and their principals thought were master teachers, excellent teachers. We also identified some teachers who were considered to be quite good teachers. And we separated them into two piles. Those who were master teachers or good teachers who had industry experience in their field, and those who had come directly to their teaching through a teacher education pathway. Obviously the master teachers had also done teacher education pathways. And there was a substantial difference in the way they communicated knowledge when they had the industry experience. People who had the industry experience and who were master teachers tended to focus on inquiry, on curiosity, on raising questions, on building students' understanding of the information through ways of knowing within the discipline. Whereas people who had come through teacher education focused on what was to be known, what knowledge needed to be demonstrated. As it turned out, when it came to tests, the differences were minuscule, not really substantial. However, the movement into careers beyond that was substantial. The people that, the students who had been apprentices to the master teachers who had industry experience moved on into careers in the field of science, whereas the other students tended to move into university study. They were good, but not necessarily with the same enthusiasm or connection or intention toward scientific careers. So I thought that was quite a fascinating study and perhaps relevant to this morning.
Yeah. So it already has some effect. So we already discussed the different form of education, and for different form we need different support for it. So we go into detail about the program, because for any form we need a certain program, a certain curriculum for it, or it is small curriculum or it's a big curriculum. So we already start from the objective. So the other element of the curriculum is content, methodology, assessment, and the other condition. So here's the three questions about how is an effective STEM education program. So in addition to the objective, of course, is the most important, and how about the other components like the content or like how to enable the active, effective learning of students. Yep. So can you discuss?
To answer these different questions, and once again, I'm not going to give a straightforward answer, I apologize. But I think I've done a study about 10 years ago as well of these teachers that were engaged in this interdisciplinary approach in lower secondary school that I explained earlier. And following teams of teachers that were working together to see what were the criteria or the factors that influence a team of teachers managing to work well together, or the team of teachers that had more difficulties. So in a way, it's the effectiveness of their program they were engaged in. And we identified 3 dimensions that were very important to consider. The first dimension is an organizational dimension. The second one is operational dimension, and the third one would be a more epistemologic dimension. And the first dimension, organizational dimension, is basically linked to how the teachers manage to have time to meet, to have facilities to be able to work, to have a supportive headmaster, to have a little bit of funding, so if they wanted to buy equipment or something like that. So it's very organizational matters. And as it turned out, this first element was the first that made them drop out the project if these criteria were not met. And actually, the most important criteria was whether the headmaster was supportive or not. So all the project that failed was when the headmaster changed, for example, because sometimes it happens in a school, and the new headmaster was not really aware of the project or was not so interested in the project, and as a result, the teachers dropped their engagement.